Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Super C, brought to us by Konami. Super C is the sequel to Contra on the NES, and while based off of the Super Contra arcade version, it does have some changes, including new levels that were added to this one, as well as a few different bosses. So here we go with Super C on the NES. Unlike the original Contra, you can't get 30 lives, there's only a 10 life code, but we're going to jump in with just the default. The game does include a variety of power-ups, including the machine gun that I'm picking up right here. There's the spread shot, which is my favorite. There's also a flamethrower that's also pretty actually powerful in this version. There's the laser, and then there's also the rapid fire that can increase the speed of any of the guns, and there's also the barrier that you're able to get. Some enemies you can just jump over, and during this first part, I'm going to run past the area pretty quickly, only turning around when I need to fire at the few enemies that are still trailing me. Be careful of the grenades, just halting a moment or so and get in between them as they stop firing. The game, of course, is one-hit death, so you gotta be very, very careful, and when you do die, you do end up losing whichever gun you ended up having. Once again, be careful on the slope of the grenades, jump in between them, get around them, and then at the top, I had to be very careful. I almost got landed on by an enemy. You really want to step forward a few more steps before trying to turn around and deal with that. Once we reach the top here, though, it's time to deal with this boss encounter. Fire upwards as well at the helicopter above. Just using the spread shot, you can take out this thing in just a matter of moments. Area number 2 changes up the perspective with the top-down view, similar to the likes of Commando or Akari Warriors, though thankfully this controls and is a lot better. The spread shot and the other guns do carry over into the next level, so if you're able to survive a boss with a weapon, you're able to keep that into that next stage, which is always very useful. Be very careful of the tanks. You can get in between their shots like you can see here. And then when you take out the one on the left, you can get up between them and take out the one on the right without having to get back in front of it, potentially getting hit. A lot of this area, like I did in the first level, is moving quickly. Just keep moving upwards, and that way a lot of enemies won't even have the opportunity to do much to you. A couple of enemies will just keep firing. They stay stationary, firing, hoping they'll get you, but if you're just power walking through, they can't hit you. The ones at the end here you will need to take out just so you have enough time to then take out the gate. Right afterwards, though, you do have a boss encounter. Just move very carefully along the bottom, firing upwards at the boss. Be out of the reach of the tank thing, as it can kind of bring out that electricity towards you. As long as you're relatively near the bottom of the screen, you shouldn't have too much problem being able to dodge out of the way of its attacks. Area number 3 takes us to the jungle, very reminiscent of level 1 of Contra here. We're going to start off by running across the very bottom plane. There's a few enemies that will pop out of the trees, which are a bit annoying. They automatically fire out a bullet, even if you're really quick at taking them out, so be prepared to jump over a few stray random bullets that come from the trees. Thankfully, a lot of enemies will just be behind us, and we can just gather a lot of them up on screen and keep running, and then fire behind us when needed. Be careful of the giant launcher that you're able to destroy and get away from it before all of those bombs come crashing down. Take out all the enemies before jumping in the water. It's just a little bit easier to do it that way, and then quickly move across the water. Don't jump while in the water, just kind of move across fast, and you'll hopefully be able to get past all of these shots. At the very end, be careful getting out. There will be a guy up in the trees firing at you. And then it's just a little bit more running on the ground level with more of those just random enemies kind of running full force as possible towards you. Sometimes I like to see how many I can get gathered and then jump over them. Now for this boss, you're going to stay away from it. We're going to keep firing. If you're on top of it, you can actually fire at it using the spread shot and hurt it, and it can't hit you. You're actually able to not get hit at all. Now unfortunately, you really can't hurt it when you're up there. It's really hard to hit those shots, but it is a nice safe spot if you do need it. That boss is one of the more annoying ones I've always found. The level, though, isn't quite done yet, though. We still have more to go. Be very careful. There are some pits that will suck you right down into them if you're on them, so as soon as the ground starts going away underneath of you, make sure that you jump. Anytime that you get a hold of the barrier icon, you have that invulnerability for about 10 seconds. Make sure that you use it to your full advantage. Now it's time for the actual boss of the level. You have these rotating things on this machine that will then kind of spread apart and fire at you. It's just a lot of bullets. I find staying on the ground for most of it and kind of get them concentrated towards the center, and then move just slightly left or right when needed to avoid whatever bullets possible, and firing up consistently upwards. Always firing, and eventually the boss should go down. Area number 4, as you can see, starts us off in this corridor here. Watch out for the evil bubbles that come sparkling down. Be sure to fire upwards when running through there. Sometimes it's impossible to avoid picking up a power-up, so I end up getting the machine gun for a little bit. Be careful of these barrels that end up falling when you jump up to these platforms. And then when you're moving upwards in these areas, you got to be cautious, of course, of enemies above you. You have these dive-bombing enemies that like to drop down on top of you, which are very annoying. Just kind of when you're jumping, I like to fire upwards as I'm doing so. Stop here for a moment. Be sure to be down far enough that you can avoid the fire from the turret thing, as well as you're avoiding all of those barrels falling as well. Here we have a classic little elevator segment here. Thankfully they do give you that machine gun power up right near the beginning of it in case you didn't have any weapon going in here. Interesting to note that the reason why we ended up getting the game called Super C instead of actually being called Super Contra in North America was due to the Iran-Contra scandal that was going on around that time. Right after that elevator segment, you're going to be bombarded by a lot of enemies. Keep moving up and firing, and then you'll make it to another elevator segment. This time you have a few moving turrets on these like singular bars. Just kind of keep firing up towards them. As long as you're able to kind of move a little bit, you should be able to dodge most of the fire during this segment. It's relatively slow paced. Thankfully, during the course of it, there are some power-ups to pick up, including a spread shot, a very, very useful spread shot. Anytime you have those like bubbles coming down at you, just keep firing upwards. Here at the very top, once again, a bunch of enemies going to bombard us. We're just going to fire up that spread shot that we now have. Stay on the bottom portion here. There's just so many enemies. Keep firing upwards until they're all cleared out, or at least most of them are cleared out, before you attempt to jump up. Also be careful of these enemies as well as they're flying around. Right after that, though, it's time for a wonderful boss encounter. Watch out for the lasers that get dropped down. You can kind of keep going back and forth left and right as it's firing, and keep firing up at it at the same time. And it ends up working rather well as you'll slowly destroy the random laser shooting bars. Next up is Area 5 here, this mountain climbing area, one of the NES exclusive levels here. Just be very careful. This is very similar to that level from Contra 1. There's a lot of firepower going on here, and there's sometimes just really impossible to dodge everything going on. There is some power-ups, so thankfully you have a few that you'll be able to get, but there is going to be so many enemies going on screen, you may end up getting hit, or just even a slowdown potentially could cause you to miss a jump or two. Unfortunately, I'm not perfect, and I end up losing a life on that rock. I just forgot to wait that extra second so that rock could have passed. Right after that, though, we're on top of this compartment. We're going to start dropping down the side. Enemies are going to chase us as we do so. You can get a bunch of them gathered up and then kind of duck down. Be careful of the turret right here as well, so you can kind of duck on this platform, take out the turret and all those enemies that have been gathering behind you at that same time, and then do the same again a few platforms later. Now for this boss, unfortunately I don't have my spread shot, but still I can easily fire at that center part. I gotta just be a little bit more precise with my bullets. There's a lot of firepower kind of coming at you. You have the little aliens moving across the bottom that you're consistently jumping around, and then you have in the air the red pulsating projectiles that will slowly kind of chase you down. The good thing about them is they are slow, and it usually doesn't get a lot out before you're able to take out the alien ship. So just focus your firepower, do a lot of jumps and firing, and you should be able to take them out without losing too many lives. The next level is another one of those top-down perspective stages as we're making it farther into Super C here. I do like the color scheme going on here, the green and all. I also like the overall design, just that very kind of creepy alien thing that you end up seeing, the giant mouths trying to eat you during this segment. You gotta be very careful. There's only a few that may potentially end up grabbing you. I usually just walk up the left side if one's coming up and just quickly make sure that I don't run into it, get out of its way, and keep moving upwards. There's rotating enemies, just keep firing and keep working up, especially if you don't have a power-up, until eventually you make it to this corridor. Thankfully, you can get a power-up, but then you're bombarded with enemies. There is one of those destroy all enemies things during that segment, so make sure that you grab that so that you at least can clear the screen of enemies and have a chance of getting through, as there's just so much going on. For the first part of this boss, we're just going to walk up and all the faces are immediately taken out as we do a giant amount of spread shot fire, really close and concentrated, takes it out. But then a few moments later, the actual boss ends up making its presence felt. Kind of scary for sure. We're going to keep firing straight up, standing about in the center. Then when the other rotating alien kind of gets towards us, we'll back away. And then just keep repeating that process as we're firing as many shots possible into it as we can. As we begin the next level, start off by dropping down into the alien base here. This is another one of the NES exclusive levels. Pretty much the vertical scrolling levels were the ones that became exclusive for the NES version. Be very careful on each one of these platforms. Just blast at each enemy, take out the big purple thing before attempting to move to that next platform. There's usually enough space where you won't have to worry too much about dodging its fire and still being able to take it out. It doesn't take too many bullets, even without the spread shot, to destroy it. Now for this area, we need to destroy the ground below us. We're going to keep jumping and firing down below us. Thankfully, the spread shot helps us a lot as we slowly make our way down. It can be a little annoying to kind of work your way through this, but at least you're not fighting enemies as well. They're not dropping down from above. Right after that, there is a couple of power-ups, but then you have these alien hatching things, so be very careful of the pods that are hatching the little aliens. Blast them off the platforms if need be before attempting to move to that next one. Just keep moving and firing. Fire behind you in case you end up leaving one. It'll only be a threat as long as the pod is still on screen. Once it goes off screen, you're good, and we're dropping down into the boss encounter. Just keep jumping and firing straight up at the jaw of the enemy. If you time it right, you can actually destroy its firepower as well, just negating it, making the battle a bit easier, but it does take a little bit of timing and a little bit of luck. Unfortunately, also the slimes that are in this boss can drop down and potentially take you out like they did me here. If that happens, just keep going back to what you were doing before, using just the default gun, jumping and firing straight up, and hopefully it won't be too much longer before that boss is taken down. Now it's time for the final level of the game. There's some floating aliens right near the beginning. We can get a power up to grab this machine gun, and that'll help us a little bit until we're able to get to a spread shot. Being the final level, it is difficult. There's a lot kind of going on throughout this. There's some more power-ups, including another machine gun and more rapid fire, so in case you've already gotten hit at that point, you can at least get that. And then thankfully, right after that, on these slanted platforms, we're able to get the spread shot. Be careful of the alien head, take it out, and then jump up a couple of platforms, run across, destroying the next one, and then jump up the next set of platforms. I absolutely love the level design, of course, for this place. As we make it on solid ground here, we're going to be running for a little bit, and the ceiling in a second is going to start coming down on us that can potentially push us into pits. As you run through, the ceiling comes crashing down, but stops just above you. Thankfully, you don't have to worry about getting crushed, you really just have to worry about being pushed right straight down into a few pits that are going to be coming up. The other enemies, for the most part, I'm just going to keep running and blasting as I go through here. If need be, stand still for a moment or two, take out all the enemies, and you may need to cycle the pass through of it coming down. Then continuing your path over to the right, just doing these jumps one by one until eventually you make it to the end. When you do make it to the end here, we're going to do a big jump. This is always fun to fall down a few levels. Just be sure to hug the left wall a little bit so that any aliens chasing you don't end up running into you. Now it's time for the final boss of the game, and unfortunately the final boss is very, very, very easy. There's a sweet spot that we're going to use, and that will allow us to pretty much go unscathed throughout the course of this fight. When the boss spawns, jump on top of that first kind of bone leg thing here, and just kind of stand there and fire upwards. Just keep on firing, you'll be able to avoid all the firepower from the boss, as well as being able to deliver damage to it, and then you can sit back and enjoy the ending to Super C on the NES. So, yep, there you have it, Super C on the NES, a worthy successor to the original Contra. It's a lot of fun, it's very difficult, it took a lot of practice and runs to be able to pull off this one that I did here, and that's still far from perfect, but since in Contra you don't really lose a lot of progress when you die, I figured a few deaths wouldn't be that awful. Anyway guys, that's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.